Ever since movies have been around, it seems, there have been movies that weren't made all that well, but people still loved regardless. And when these movies attracted a particularly large audience, they would often be known as cult movies. Because while they aren't generally considered that great, they do have a strong and dedicated group of people that love them and will defend it with everything they've got. And one of the more famous examples of this would be infamous director Ed Wood, who loved the art of filmmaking but wasn't all that good at telling stories, and not to mention had an extremely strange style, which often resulted in some pretty badly made films. But for whatever reason, there are groups of people out there, even to this day, that love his movies specifically because they're bad, which has led Wood to become one of the most famous cult movie directors out there. And today, I'd like to explore why exactly people love cult movies like Ed Wood's, and why sometimes a movie that's not as well written as it could be is more appealing to audiences than absolute masterpieces. And there will be some spoilers for a couple of movies ahead, so in case there's something you don't want ruined, you might just want to be on the lookout. You have been warned. Okay, so to touch on what I said in my video on why people like bad movies, which you can find a link in the description to, sometimes a cult movie just has frankly everything that a person wants. And while it can be argued that a better written movie could supply all of that to an even greater extent, that isn't always the case. I mean, just look at the infamous The English Patient. Nobody will deny that it's a well-made movie, but it also wasn't made for general audiences. Because, simply put, most people aren't interested in a slow-moving 3-hour drama where the lead is already condemned to death from the start. That's just not most people's idea of a good time. Basically, sometimes what is considered traditionally good and what an audience will enjoy watching don't always match up. Like, take Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull versus the Dial of Destiny. Because while most will concede that the Dial of Destiny is a better made movie, it's also a bit boring and feels like it wasted one too many opportunities. The Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, however, has Shia LaBeouf swinging with monkeys, dated CGI, and the infamous nuking the fridge scene. Simply put, Crystal Skull is at least memorable in its badness, while Dial of Destiny just comes across as generic in part because it was made better. In other words, what I'm trying to say here is that sometimes people would rather have fun with a movie than admire its artistic brilliance. Which is why the Ed Wood movies, for example, are still so well known. Because even if they're bad and the audience knows it, people remember them. They're able to have fun with it, even if it's by laughing at the badness of what they're seeing. But when it's the filmmaker's intention to go this route in the first place, then it can lead to even better results because in those cases, the movies end up both campy but also better written. And a great example of this would be the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Sure, it would never win an Academy Award, but people love it specifically for that reason. It's campy, it's fun, it doesn't take itself seriously, and it's got Tim Curry. To put it simply, if somebody is looking for a fun, musical horror movie style parody, then this has got everything they could ever possibly ask for. Especially because it's also decently written to boot. But, as befitting its intended cult nature, it also isn't for just anybody. This is a movie that's specifically written for people who love cult movies, and it certainly delivers on that front. Or for another example of that, take The Little Shop of Horrors, which is, in the words of screenwriter Howard Ashman himself, supposed to be stupid. In other words, rather than trying to play a giant singing Venus flytrap completely straight, and thus appealing to very few in the process, the movie smartly chooses to embrace its absurd premise full throttle, and the result is a movie that even non-cult lovers generally like. And the reason for that, apart from a legendary performance as Audrey 2 by the one and only Levi Stubbs, is the fact that it does tell an actual compelling story. Because underneath all that camp and singing, there's a real, serious story about a man basically selling his soul to the devil and trying to redeem himself. And, somewhat fittingly, in a deviation from the original play, he actually succeeds in the movie version, which might have even helped its appeal to general audiences over the years. Because what's important to remember is, even when played for absurdity, there is a limit to how much camp can mask tragedy. Because in the original cut of Little Shop of Horrors, things play out like they do in the play. But because of changes made earlier, it ends up coming across as undeserved and mean-spirited, completely undercutting the fun and camp that it's meant to evoke first and foremost. So Frank Oz made the tough decision to redo the ending to a happier one, more in line with the movie he had ended up making. And considering what test audiences had to say, that was for the best. But this is also why certain campy and cult movies fail, because they take the death and tragedy in them too far, to the point that the fun or impossible to take seriously atmosphere becomes lost. Like Killer Clowns from Outer Space, for example, suffers from this to a minor extent. Now, this is actually one of the most famous cult movies out there, and has an extremely dedicated following because of that. And I will say, its ability to be both extremely campy and deliver on actual horror a couple of times is actually pretty impressive. But one minor issue many have with it, however, is that too many people die. Now, I'm not talking about all those people who are depicted as getting killed off in creative ways by the clowns, as those are just par for the course. But it's towards the end of the movie when the main characters mention that most of the townspeople who had been captured by the clowns are still alive, only for them to end up dead by the end anyway. And then the movie ends with those same characters being hit with pies. And to some people, it feels like the movie is just glossing over the deaths of all those people a little too much, especially because it's made clear that they could have lived. And tellingly, when test audiences had to choose between the endings where Dave and the two brothers lived and died, they went with the one where all three lived, probably for this exact reason. Because simply put, this isn't the type of movie that you want to be left feeling upset about, even to a small extent. Though, to be fair, that's often a minor complaint among fans, and there have been many other movies of a similar nature to screw this up much worse. But nonetheless, that's why a movie like Mars Attacks is so appealing to many cult movie fans. Because, as I discussed at length in my video on the movie, which you can also find a link in the description to, Mars Attacks gets all of these different aspects right. It doesn't ignore the tragedy that ensues, but is still able to have fun anyway, takes the parody of disaster movies to campy extremes, and was even modeled after the master of cult films himself, Ed Wood. Because as I brought up in the aforementioned video, Tim Burton even said he wanted to make the movie in the style of Wood, but only better written. So simply put, this movie pretty much takes all the best aspects of cult movies and rolls it up into one delightfully destructive package. Sure, the movie might not be for everybody, but as I said before, that's part of the point of cult movies. And even though one is decidedly better when it comes to the traditional way of judging movies, I'm pretty sure even general audiences might have had a better time watching this movie than The English Patient. Because in the end, the Best Picture winner may be a better movie, but Mars Attacks is also more fun, even if it's not for everyone. Okay, I think I've made my point with this. So now I'd like to hear from you guys. Why do you believe campy cult movies that are made to be intentionally bad appeal so much to certain people? And do you enjoy them personally, or do you feel more comfortable sticking to the conventional stuff? Please let me know in the comments below. And if you disagreed with this video, that's perfectly okay. Movies are extremely subjective in nature, and if the movies I was giving praise to aren't your taste, that's absolutely fine, and you are free to feel that way. I was only trying to explain the nature behind that subjective thinking, and not if anybody is right or wrong to feel the way they do. And thank you all for watching. It's very greatly appreciated. And I hope to see you all next time.